dash attributes are added. We could have manually added that and still implemented the client-side attributes, but might as well let the Razor View Engine do it for us. Okay, so now because I specified that in the model here that these two properties are required, and because the Razor View Engine built the proper HTML so that it hooks in with these JavaScript packs, the validate and the unobtrusive pack, the client-side validation will be set to go. And so if I click Submit Query, you'll see that we have this this nice formatted client-side validation. Nothing was submitted. It was all done on the client, and we have some nice styles that were added to the browser. And just on a side note, we can go look at the style that it uses in the default style sheet in the content directory, site.cs. If we scroll all the way down of this site.cs, not all the way down, but straight down to styles for validation helpers, we're going to see these field-validation error classes of the CSS file. And I guess it is all the way down. These hook into, these classes are the name of classes that are referenced inside of the validate JavaScript. We won't waste our time looking in there, but there is some magic that occurs, and that's how it's all hooked in together. There's some naming conventions that the Razor View uses. But for all intents and purposes, we can ignore that. All we know is that it does, in fact, implement client validation. What's neat about the MVC and Razor View is with the model data annotations that are required here, and there's a bunch of other data annotations that we won't go into. But what's really cool about it is if we disable JavaScript on the browser, I'm going to use Firefox so I can easily disable JavaScript. If we okay, here I'm going to go to the same site in Firefox, and I'm going to submit the query. We see the client validation is fired off. But if I disable JavaScript, refresh the page, and now what happens? It still generates a message to the browser after it went to the server. If you notice up here, you'll see it refresh the page, and it did it really fast. But if we refresh it again, enable JavaScript, and look up here, you shouldn't see any change because it never went anywhere. It stayed on the client and it was validated. So using these HTML helpers and implementing data annotations on, or implementing a model with a view along with data annotations, you get a lot of bang for your buck because you get client-side validation, server-side validation, and then in terms of the UI, the result looks the same whether the validation occurred on the client or the server. And you can use the same CSS, I mean the UI of the validation errors are all based on style sheets. So you can create your own style sheet and let the, in fact we'll just do that right now. Let's say that the validation error, let's change the color to 0066 and 99, and the background color is let's just say yellow. So I'm gonna no, don't need to do it. Just save it and I'll refresh the page. Okay, so now So now you can see that the border is now blue and the text box is yellow. So we can make the client look like anything we wish without having to build all the JavaScript hooks and the proper HTML and hook it in with CSS. It's pretty slick. Let's see what else. Not much else to say about that. It's pretty slick in terms of how much code you wrote versus how much you gain. It's really nice. And what's really neat about the HTML helper builders or the Razor views is it does not create a bunch of HTML that just screws up the entire of how the web works. It's really nice. Okay. What we have right now is nothing more than a website that has 2 pages. We have the login page and we have the home page. And if we were to type in home, by the way, it would be the same thing. Now what we want to do is have a website that in order to enter the website you have to log in. Once you log in, then you can see the content of the web page. Something like Facebook, let's just say, that you have to log in to get to all of the menus. And so the implication here, or on the menu part, when you get to the login page, you don't want the user to see any menu items yet because he hasn't been authenticated yet. So it's not until you're authenticated that you get to see the menus. So let's go at this at one at a time. First, we're going to build the login logic, and then we will build the security behind the scenes. So we have login so far, and when we submit it, we'll say no, never. When we submit this, nothing happens, right? And that's because we haven't done any code. We've got to go into our controller, our login controller, and then go to our method that handles a web request or an HTTP post request for the login. And let's add some code that does. So what we want it to do is first let's look at the model that's returned from the client and passed to this method. It should be noted here that there's a little bit of magic that happens in this case. When the client submits the form, all of that data comes from the browser headers. All of the form data is sent in the browser headers, sent to the MVC engine. MVC looks at the headers and passes it to the Razor engine, and the Razor says, hey, I see these form variables, and the names of the form variables match the names of this login model. And by the way, it's because I'm specifying this login model parameter. So the Razor view engine will say, okay, I'm going to try to associate, I'm going to sync up any client-side header variables in the form with the model properties of this login model. And if there's some that sync up, I'm gonna add that value to the login model. And it does anyway. I won't go into. So what we want to do now is do model state is valid. And what this does is make sure that the state of the model has no errors in it, and we can build our own validation for our model, but that's beyond the scope of this video. Point is, just get in the habit of whenever you receive to wrap your method, or in your method wrap your code around the model state.isValid checker. Just good habit. All right, anyway, so now we got to go. We're going to look at the data of the model that was passed in. So if the model dot username equals Jed and model dot password equals let's say Albao, then what we want to do is set a cookie on the client that informs the MVC engine that you're authenticated. By the way, this right here this is where you would actually call, you simulate your data store here, where the username, password exists. So here's where we'd actually call to look for a username and password that exists in a database, but we're just going to do it like this for now. The critical thing for making it work, making authentication work with MVC is when you apply the set this thing right here. Just show forms authentication, and we have to bring in the system web security namespace. And here's where we set an authorized cookie. And in the cookie, we pass in the model.username. You can actually add anything there you want. And then we can put true or false for the create persistent cookie. I'm going to put false. If you put false, that means when the browser is closed by the person, the cookie will automatically be destroyed. If this value is set to true, that means that they can close a browser and open it back up, and they're still going to be authenticated. Okay, so what we've done here is validate the username in a very simple, stupid way, but you get the idea. You validate the username and password, and then if it's successful, then we set the forms authentication set auth cookie. And we're going to see that cookie be set on the client. And then after they're authenticated, then we can return the user. We're going to redirect the user to a different view, which is going to be the index page of the home controller. You can redirect them anywhere you wish, but we're going to do this. And if the username fails, what we can do, there's a lot of things we can do, but what we're going to do here, to keep it simple, is we're going to add a model error. And it's going to say invalid username or password. And this is cool because this message will be sent back down to the client if the authentication fails. So you're adding an error message or an exception to the model state. Notice how we have a model state is valid, model state. So you have a couple things hanging off the model state class that you can utilize. Okay. And now if we think of the flow here, the browser is at the login page. And then we'll step through it. How about that? So now I'm going to run it. Actually, what I want to do is show how the different methods are called. So I'm going to refresh this page, and when I go to the login view, notice how this action result is fired. Or, I mean, this index or this action is fired, because the reason why this one is fired is because the MVC engine noticed that or maybe it's the Razor view engine, I'm not sure, but it noticed that it's not a request, an HTTP post request, and so it fired off this one, this action. Now, when I submit the username and password, this one is now fired. So that's kind of cool. And in this parameter here